So here I am at Taksim Gezi Park. Now this may look like just a normal park in the center of Istanbul with a nice fountain and green space and benches for people to sit. But there's actually some major significance to this park. And if history were different, or had the events of history been a little bit different, this park wouldn't exist right now. I would be standing on the grounds of perhaps some commercial or apartment buildings or a parking lot. Certainly I wouldn't be standing on the grounds of a park. In 2013, there were proposals to demolish this park, or at least large parts of it, for urban development. And this park, it was proposed, would be dismantled, and much of what you see right now would cease to exist. As you can imagine, this did not sit well with many of the residents of Istanbul, because there's not that much green space or park space in Istanbul. So this was one of the biggest parks in the center of the city. So if this park were to be demolished, a lot of people would not have green space, would not have a place to walk, to sit, to enjoy the outdoors. And like with many cities that have issues and conflict between urban developers, people trying to build condominiums and apartment complexes and commercial buildings versus ordinary citizens who want to just enjoy some green space. So that evidently was a conflict that presented itself here. Now, what happened after was actually really interesting. So there were protests that started at this park, at this very space that I'm walking through right now. And it started with sit-ins, people protesting the urban development of this park, and that grew. That started out with protests about the park, but it grew into protests about all types of different things: social issues, economic issues, political issues, and it expanded into mass protests, not just in Istanbul, but across all of Turkey in 2013. Anti-government protests, anti-corporate protests, anti this, anti that. There was no central leadership, or there was localized leadership, but there wasn't central leadership. The protests grew organically over a number of issues and derived from the discontent over a wide spectrum of social, economic, and political matters. Taksim Square, which is next to this park, was occupied by protesters for many days, who chanted slogans and advocated for change. The protests also got violent. There were groups of people who unfortunately were injured, and some people were even killed. Not too sure if you remember some of the pictures from 2013 of police in riot gear facing off against protesters in Turkey, in Istanbul and other places in Turkey. And I remember one famous picture of police, I think with either pepper spray or a water cannon, attacking this poor lady who was wearing high heels, was in a cocktail dress, just walking across this park and getting sprayed or attacked. So that was a very controversial moment. A lot of people saw that as state overreach. But I think this park and the protests thereafter, I wouldn't want to comment too much about the social political issues that happened after. But I want to go back to this park and talk about the need for green space within a city. Istanbul, like many other major cities in the world, personally, in my opinion, these cities need green space, right? They need places where families, children can play, can be safe. You can see that there's children here, families here in this area with these playground. This it looks like a playground and the equipment. I think about Canada, where I grew up, and we don't even have parks like this anymore for different reasons. These playgrounds were predominantly over the last 10 to 15 years dismantled. And not for the reason you would think, but they were dismantled mainly because the people who maintained the playgrounds were afraid of liability. They were afraid of being sued by lawyers. That they thought, if kids were to be injured in these playgrounds, then they would face legal action. So these playgrounds and the agencies or governments or organizations that maintain these playgrounds, at least in Canada, where I'm from, were dismantled. So when I was growing up, you would see playgrounds, many playgrounds in different spaces in Toronto, and now hardly ever. I don't think I've seen a playground recently. So that is concerning. And when you don't have playgrounds, you also don't have families and children going about in public places. In North America, that's a really big issue because a lot of parents keep their kids inside. They have various excuses for that. Fear of kids getting hurt, lost, hysteria over sexual predators, whatever it may be. But there is a certain notion that kids should just stay inside. And that's perpetuated by the lack of public space and parks available for children and families to do exactly this, to play and to enjoy themselves. I've been to many countries where these playgrounds, these types of playgrounds are quite common. Last week I was in Bucharest in Romania, where in the center of Romania there are many playgrounds and parks for children. I was in Panama about 2 years ago, and in Panama City, playgrounds everywhere. In Spain, there are playgrounds for children and families. In many major cities in the world, there are playgrounds for families and children. But in North America, for some reason, we've decided to take a very legalistic approach to it, perhaps, or I don't know what the word is, but we've taken a very sensitive, oversensitive, I would argue, approach to just having playgrounds and public space. So I find that concerning because it encourages families to stay indoors, children to stay indoors, to be on their devices, their mobile phones, to use apps instead of interacting with the real world, with trees, with plants, with animals, with the real world out here. There are children now growing up in North America and perhaps other places who don't understand nature. They're afraid of leaves. They're afraid of bugs. They've never interacted with nature. So they grow up just interacting with apps and computer screens. And it's partially the parents' responsibility, I would say, to encourage children to play and to be in a state of play and to interact with nature. I grew up in the 1980s in China. I was born in 1984 in Beijing. And I remember that for the first 5 or 6 years of my life, I came to Canada when I was about 5 or 6 years old. For the first 5 or 6 years of my life, there was always outdoor play. Now, mind you, this was the 80s, right? So the internet didn't exist back then, and we had a small TV. It was still, very, very communist at the time, and everybody was poor, and everybody more or less had the same thing. So that was the world I grew up in. But I remembered that I would play every night, and there was no safety issue. There was no issue about sexual predators or kids getting hurt. Kids were supposed to go and play outside. The neighborhood took care of the kids, right? The older people who just voluntarily and organically formed a bit of a neighborhood watch, where they would keep track of whose kids were who. None of the kids were lost, right? They didn't get lost. They didn't get kidnapped. They didn't get killed, injured, or maimed. A lot of these hysterical fantasies that many parents have nowadays in the modern world about kids getting injured. I don't think that existed. Kids played outside. I would bruise my knee sometimes and fall, and that was okay. I would cry as a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, and I would heal, and I learned from that. And I think every child deserves the opportunity to go outside and get injured a little bit, and play, and jump, and fight, and interact with other children and with nature. So it's sad as well. This is another social commentary of mine, but in North America, especially right now, in many cities, including Vancouver, Toronto, and Canada, I'm talking about cities like San Francisco in the United States and many other cities. Green space has, for many different reasons, been essentially taken over by homeless encampments, right? So I'm not going to be overly political as to the causes of that or what the solution is. I'm not here to make a political video about homeless encampments, but certainly they are no longer the same type of communal space that they used to be, right? There's groups of homeless people who are using substances. They're living now in these parks, and it's just not the same. It's a phenomenon that now pervades North America in this time, right? 2014, and it started more predominantly during the pandemic, even before the pandemic, but it's become a big issue in many North American cities that local citizens and the people paying property taxes can't enjoy the parks the same way. Again, I'm not here to say that, or I'm not here to not empathize with people who are experiencing homelessness, because that's a serious issue and people become homeless for different reasons, and they should be empathized with. But at the same time, the phenomenon is the phenomenon that these types of parks are being used very differently and by a different group of people. So the need for green space and functional green space in cities is important. I think it's important for urban planners who are building and designing cities to maintain and have green space and communal space. If you think about it, cities now are almost the opposite of what they used to be in terms of the green space to urban ratio. In the past, most of the land surrounding a city would have been green space. It would have been forest, it would have been jungle, depending on where you were and where you lived, and you had a small central urbanized area, and you would have been surrounded by the elements. But now, things are a little bit different, where predominantly you have the city, the urban elements of the city, concrete buildings surrounding a little last remaining sanctuary of nature, which is an interesting way to live. And if you don't study history and if you don't study anthropology, then this looks and feels natural to you, but it's not really natural. This is a very artificial way to live. But then again, many things about the way that we've developed and designed our society is somewhat artificial in terms of what we do to trees, to nature, to green space, to parks, to elements of the natural world that we try to control. And we've mastered it. We've certainly mastered nature. In the past, to master nature was a thing of pride. If you recall, at the Palace of Versailles, the gardens are extravagant. Versailles in France, they're extravagant gardens, and the gardens are manicured in a particular way. Part of what the Louis kings at the time, like Louis XIV, what they were trying to state in doing so, in creating these extravagant gardens, was that they had control over nature. Right? If a king or a sovereign has control over nature, they have control over the land, and by inference, control over people, and they have power, perhaps even divinely appointed power to rule. But that was a time when the control of nature was more difficult. That was the pre-industrial era, where in Versailles, they were using more primitive tools and more primitive hydraulics to garden and to control nature. So that at the time was impressive. Now controlling nature is probably not that impressive, in the sense that we've captured and domesticated most of nature, at least from the perspective of controlling green space. So that's my comment with respect to the control of nature. I'm going to walk down this street, and, well, not really a street, but this little walkway. Well, this is Gezi Park, everyone. It's a pleasant day. It's a Monday, May the 6th in 2024. A very pleasant day to go for a walk and to think. I often find that taking a walk, for me at least, is great for thinking. I find that when I'm moving my body, I think better. And if I stay in one place, I don't think as well. There's some mind-body connection to the actual act of moving that's important. And a lot of thinkers in history have said that. A lot of philosophers. I think Immanuel Kant was, from what I remember, a big walker. He would think and walk a lot. And rumor had that René Descartes did not do that as much. He didn't get out of bed until 12 o'clock is from what I remember. Who knows if that's true or not. These are anecdotes. But whatever the case may be, thinking and walking seem to go hand in hand. And it's good to have a sanctuary away from the busyness of the city, the cars, the pollution, the people, which actually clouds and interferes, I believe, with thinking. It's hard to think in a major city. If you're in New York and Toronto or London, and there's cars and people everywhere, and just the busyness and the overwhelming stampede of foot traffic everywhere around you, it impedes thinking. It impedes that type of mental exercise of clearing your mind and coming up with new thoughts. So if there were one other benefit I could state of having these types of parks is the generation of, among many other benefits, of course, is the generation of thought and new thought and philosophy, which for me is really important. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Gezi Park. It's not too far away from where I'm staying. I'm staying in this building up here. This is the Intercontinental Hotel. That's where I'm living, and that's where I have been living over the last couple of days. right there. And I will now walk back towards my hotel, having given this walk some thought and having expressed my thoughts on this walk. And I hope you're having a wonderful day for those of you watching and viewing at home, and we will speak soon.